Lena was mentally unstable, a helpless woman who couldn't even manage a checking account, let alone her own life. He had the best lawyers money could buy, a prenup that looked like a death sentence, and a narrative the whole world believed. But Julian made one fatal calculation. He mistook silence for weakness. He didn't know that while he was building a cage, Elena was forging a key, and he certainly didn't expect who would walk through the courtroom doors as her final witness, a ghost from the past that would turn his empire into dust in exactly 3 minutes. This is the story of the ultimate betrayal, and the most satisfying revenge you will ever hear. The chandeliers inside the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel in New York City didn't sparkle. They glared. It was the annual Vanguardia Global Charity Gala, an event where a single table cost more than most American families earned in a decade. Julian Thorne stood at the center of the room, a glass of 1945 Romanée Conti in his hand, holding court. At 42, Julian was the picture of modern American power. He was tall, with hair the color of spun silver, and a jawline that looked like it had been chiseled by a Renaissance master. He was the CEO of Vanguardia, a private equity firm that had recently acquired massive stakes in pharmaceutical logistics and government defense contracts. By his side stood Eleanor. If Julian was the sun, Eleanor was a shadow he dragged along the floor. She wore a pale blue silk dress that hung loosely on her frame. She was 36, but looked older tonight, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She clutched a small clutch bag with white-knuckled intensity. "Smile, darling," Julian whispered, leaning down to her ear. To the photographers, it looked like an intimate moment. To Elena, it was a command. "The senator is looking at us. Don't look so medicated." "I have a headache, Julian," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the clinking of crystal and the roar of laughter. "Can we please go home early? The nanny said Leo has a fever." Julian's grip on her elbow tightened, his thumb digging into the sensitive nerve between her bones. "Leo is fine. The nanny is competent. You, however, are making a scene by looking like a frightened deer. Pull yourself together, Elena. Tonight is the merger announcement." He turned away from her instantly, beaming a charismatic smile at a passing hedge fund manager. "Marcus, good to see you. How's the Hamptons property?" Elena took a step back, finding a quiet corner near a massive floral arrangement of white lilies. She felt invisible, which was exactly how Julian preferred her. Over the last 10 years, he had slowly chipped away at her. First, it was her friends. "They're just using you for my money, Elena." Then, her career in archival history. "It's a hobby, not a job. Let me take care of you." Finally, her confidence. He had convinced her, and everyone else, that she was fragile, mentally delicate, incapable of understanding the complexities of his world. A hush fell over the room as the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. Julian walked up the steps, the applause thundering like a storm. He adjusted the microphone, his charisma radiating to the back of the room. "Thank you all for coming." Julian's voice was smooth, baritone, commanding. "Tonight is about the future. Vanguardia is acquiring North Tech Systems, solidifying our place as the leader in global security." Applause. Elena clapped weakly. "But," Julian continued, his tone shifting to something somber, almost melancholic. He looked down at his podium, then slowly lifted his eyes to scan the crowd. "Success comes with sacrifice, and sometimes the weight of this life is too much for the ones we love to bear." Elena froze. This wasn't in the script. "My wife, Elena," Julian said, gesturing vaguely toward her dark corner. The spotlight swung around, blinding her. She shielded her eyes, terrified. "She has been battling," significant personal health struggles for some time. It breaks my heart to say this publicly, but transparency is the hallmark of leadership. For her own well-being, and to allow her to seek the intensive psychiatric care she needs, we will be separating effective immediately." The room gasped, a collective intake of breath from 300 of New York's elite. Elena stood paralyzed. He was divorcing her, on stage, at a gala. "I ask for privacy," Julian said, his voice cracking with feigned emotion. "I will be taking full custody of our son, Leo, during her recovery. We all pray for Elena's return to sanity. Thank you." He stepped back from the podium as the room erupted into whispers. The spotlight stayed on Elena. She felt stripped naked, flayed alive by the pitying and judging stares of the crowd. Insanity? She wasn't insane. She was tired. She was controlled. But she wasn't crazy. Julian descended the stairs, flanked by his head of security, a brute named Cale. He didn't even look at her. He walked straight to the exit. Elena scrambled to follow, her heels clicking frantically on the marble. "Julian! Julian, wait!" She caught him in the lobby, just as the valet brought his armored SUV around. "What was that?" she gasped, grabbing his sleeve. You can't take Leo. I'm his mother." Julian stopped and turned. The warmth he had shown on stage was gone. His eyes were like chips of ice. He reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out a thick, folded document. He slapped it against her chest. "You've been served, Elena," he said coldly. "My lawyers filed it this morning. Incompetence, emotional instability, and a history of depressive episodes. The penthouse locks have already been changed. Your credit cards were cancelled an hour ago." "You can't do this," she whispered, tears finally spilling over. "I have nowhere to go. I've booked you a room at the Motel 6 in Queens for 3 nights, Julian said, checking his Rolex. "After that, I suggest you find a job. Though, considering you haven't worked in a decade, I doubt you're qualified to scrub toilets." He opened the car door. Inside, sitting in the passenger seat, was a woman Eleanor recognized. It was Lydia, his 24-year-old personal assistant. Lydia didn't look at Eleanor. She just inspected her manicured nails. "Julian, please," Eleanor begged, grabbing the door handle. "Don't take my son." Julian leaned in close, his voice a low hiss. "You are helpless, Elena. You are a nobody who married a somebody. Everyone in that room saw a crazy woman tonight. If you try to fight me, I will bury you so deep the world will forget you ever existed." He shoved her hand away, slammed the door, and the black SUV sped off into the rainy Manhattan night, leaving Eleanor standing on the curb in a $5,000 dress with nothing but a legal envelope and a broken heart. The rain in New York doesn't wash things clean. It just makes the grime slicker. Eleanor sat on the edge of the stiff, stained mattress in the Queen's motel room Julian had booked. The neon sign outside buzzed with a dying flicker, casting a rhythmic red glow across the cheap divorce papers scattered on the bedspread. It had been 3 days. She had tried to call the house. Blocked. She had tried to go to Leo's private school. Security had stopped her at the gate, holding up a restraining order signed by a judge she had hosted for dinner 2 months ago. Judge Harmon, one of Julian's golf buddies. Elena looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror. The broken doll. That's what the New York Post had called her on page 6 yesterday. The headline read, "Billionaire's Burden, Julian Thorne's wife, institutionalized after gala meltdown." They were controlling the narrative perfectly. She had $40 in cash she had found in the clutch bag. That was it. But Eleanor did have one thing Julian had forgotten about. Years ago, before the marriage, before the gilded cage, Eleanor hadn't just been an archivist. She had been a researcher for a boutique forensic genealogy firm. Her job was to trace bloodlines and lost inheritances for estates. She knew how to look for things people wanted hidden. And she knew that people like Julian, people who built empires on aggression, always left a paper trail. She reached into the lining of her clutch bag and pulled out a small silver SIM card. It wasn't a phoned card. It was an encrypted data key. 4 years ago, Julian had come home drunk, boasting about a loophole he'd found in the Cayman Islands tax code that saved Vanguardia $40 million. He had passed out on the sofa, his laptop open. Elena, suspicious of his late nights, had copied a single folder titled Project Ethelgard. She had never opened it, too afraid of what she might find, too afraid of rocking the boat. Now, the boat had capsized. She had nothing left to lose. She put on her trench coat, pulled the collar up to hide her face, and walked out into the rain. She took the subway to Midtown, walking into a 24-hour internet cafe. She needed a lawyer, but not a fancy one. The fancy ones were all in Julian's pocket. She needed a shark that swam in the sewers. She spent 3 hours searching legal forums for high-conflict divorce and unethical conduct. One name kept popping up, usually accompanied by 1-star reviews from angry corporate husbands. Saul the Pitbull Berkowitz, office located above a Thai takeout place in Hell's Kitchen. Eleanor spent her last $15 on a cab to Hell's Kitchen. The office smelled of pad thai and stale cigar smoke. Piles of paper were stacked floor to ceiling, creating a labyrinth. Behind a desk that looked like it had survived a war, sat Saul. He was a small, round man with a mustard stain on his tie and suspenders that seemed to be holding on for dear life. "I don't do pro bono, sweetheart," Saul grunted without looking up from his file. "And if you're looking for the bathroom, it's for customers only." "I'm not looking for a bathroom," Elena said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'm Mrs. Julian Thorne." Saul stopped writing. He slowly looked up, peering over his spectacles. He let out a low whistle. "The gala madwoman. You look less crazy in person. A bit wet, but not crazy. I need you to represent me." Saul laughed, a dry, hacking sound. "Lady, your husband is represented by Vane & Sterling. Marcus Vane charges $2,000 an hour just to sneeze in your direction. I charge $300, and I usually take it in payment plans. You can't afford a fight with Julian Thorne. He'll crush us." "I don't want to fight him for money," Elena said, stepping forward. "I want my son, and I want to destroy him." Saul sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, Mrs. Thorne, the judge has already granted an emergency temporary custody order based on your public episode. To overturn that, we need a miracle. Do you have a miracle?" Elena reached into her pocket and placed the silver data chip on the desk. "I don't have a miracle," she said softly. "But I have the ledger." Saul picked up the chip, eyeing it skeptically. "What's on this?" 4 years ago, Julian started a shell company called Ethelgard. He uses it to funnel kickbacks from government contracts before they hit the Vanguardia books. It's highly illegal. If this gets out, he doesn't just lose the divorce, he goes to federal prison. Saul's demeanor changed instantly. The tired, slobbish lawyer vanished. In his place sat a predator who smelled blood. He plugged the chip into his ancient computer. He clicked through a few files, his eyes widening with every scroll. "Holy Mother of..." Saul muttered. This is the Holy Grail. Why haven't you used this before?" "Because I was afraid," Elena admitted. "But he took my son." Saul leaned back, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "Okay, here is the problem. This evidence is stolen, inadmissible in a divorce court directly. We can't just hand it to the judge. Julian's lawyers will claim you hacked him and have you thrown in jail for cyber espionage. So what do? We play a game, Saul said, cracking his knuckles. We let them think you're exactly what they say you are. Helpless, crazy, stupid. We let them get overconfident. We let Julian think he's won everything. And then we bring in a witness who can validate this data without you ever having to admit you stole it. Who? Elena asked. I don't know yet, Saul said, looking at the screen. But looking at these names, there's a silent partner listed here. Someone listed only as the architect. Do you know who that is? Elena looked at the screen. No. Julian never mentioned a partner. Find out who the architect is, Saul said, his voice dropping to a whisper. And we win. At that moment, Elena's phone, which she had kept turned off, buzzed. She turned it on. A text message from an unknown number. I saw what he did to you at the Pierre. I know about the Ethelgard files. If you want to see your son again, meet me at St. Patrick's Cathedral. Row 4. Midnight. Come alone. Elena showed the phone to Saul. It's a trap, Saul said. It's my only lead, Elena replied, buttoning her coat. If you go, Saul warned, and it's Julian's men, you're dead. I'm already dead, Elena said, her eyes cold. Now I'm just a ghost haunting him. She turned and walked out of the office, back into the rain. St. Patrick's Cathedral loomed against the night sky like a fortress of stone and stained glass, its spires piercing the smog of Midtown Manhattan. It was 11:55 p.m. The heavy wooden doors groaned as Eleanor pushed them open, slipping inside. The silence was absolute, a stark contrast to the sirens wailing on Fifth Avenue. The air inside was cool and smelled of frankincense and old wax. The rows of empty pews stretched out into the darkness, lit only by the flickering votive candles near the altar. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Saul had said it was a trap. Julian had men everywhere, ex-Mossad security, corrupt off-duty cops, private investigators. This could be the moment she disappeared forever, another tragic suicide of a billionaire's unstable ex-wife. She counted the rows. 1, 2, 3, 4. In the fourth row, shrouded in the shadows of a massive stone pillar, sat a figure. Elena approached slowly, her hand gripping the pepper spray Saul had forced her to buy at a bodega on the way over. I'm here, she whispered, her voice echoing slightly in the vast cavern. The figure turned. It wasn't a hitman. It was an old man in a wheelchair. He wore a wool coat that looked 3 sizes too big for his frail body. His face was a map of deep wrinkles, and his eyes were covered by dark sunglasses, even in the gloom of the church. You're late, Mrs. Thorne, the man rasped. His voice sounded like grinding gravel. Who are you? Elena asked, staying out of arm's reach. The man reached up and removed his glasses. His eyes were milky white. He was blind. My name is Arthur Penhaligon, he said. Does the name mean anything to you? Elena gasped. Penhaligon. You were the CFO of Vanguardia. 10 years ago, before Julian took over. Before Julian stole over, Arthur corrected, coughing into a handkerchief. I was the one who built the financial infrastructure of that company. When Julian staged his coup against his own father, he needed a scapegoat for the missing pension funds he had embezzled to fund his takeover. He chose me. I spent 8 years in Federal Correctional Institution, Otisville. I lost my sight due to untreated diabetes in solitary confinement. You sent the text? I have ears everywhere, Elena. Even blind men can hear the whispers of war. I know you have the Ethelgard drive. How do you know that? Elena asked, stepping closer. Because I wrote the code for it, Arthur said, a bitter smile touching his lips. Julian thinks he's a genius, but he's just a thug in a suit. He came to me in prison 5 years ago, offering to pay for my daughter's medical school if I designed a shell system that the IRS couldn't track. I did it. But I built in a back door, a dead man's switch. Elena's mind raced. Saul, my lawyer, he said we can't use the drive because it's inadmissible. They'll say I stole it. Correct? Arthur nodded. But the drive is useless without the encryption key. Julian has one half of the key. I have the other. Arthur reached into his coat and pulled out an old, tarnished brass locket. He held it out to her. Inside this locket is a microfilm strip. It contains the second half of the encryption algorithm, but more importantly, it contains the name of the one person Julian fears, the only witness who can walk into a courtroom and make that drive legal evidence. Who? Elena asked, taking the cold metal locket. His name is Lucas Sterling. Elena frowned. The name sounds familiar. It should. He was Julian's driver for 6 years, the man who saw everything, where the bodies were buried, which judges were bribed, which mistresses were paid off. Julian fired him last year when Lucas tried to blackmail him. Julian thinks Lucas is dead. He isn't. He's hiding in the one place Julian won't look. Where? The homeless encampments under the tunnel network of Riverside Park. He's an addict now, Elena. Broken. But if you can find him, clean him up and get him on the stand, he can authenticate the drive because he was the one who physically delivered the cash to the offshore couriers. Arthur grabbed Elena's wrist with surprising strength. But be warned, Julian knows the walls are closing in. He is like a cornered rat. If he finds out you are looking for Lucas, he won't just sue you, he will kill you. Suddenly, the heavy doors of the cathedral creaked open behind them. Heavy footsteps echoed on the marble floor. Go, Arthur hissed, pushing her away. Out the side vestry door. I'm just a blind old man praying. They won't touch me. Run, child. Run for your son. Elena didn't hesitate. She bolted toward the shadows of the side altar as the beams of flashlights cut through the darkness of the main aisle. She slipped out a side door into the rainy alleyway, just as she heard a deep, aggressive voice inside the church shout, "Mr. Penhaligon, what a surprise!" She clutched the locket to her chest and ran into the night. The following weeks were a blur of caffeine, strategy, and fear. Eleanor moved out of the Motel 6 and into the back room of Saul Berkowitz's office. It was safer there. Saul slept on his office couch with a baseball bat, and Elena slept on a cot in the file room, surrounded by boxes of legal precedents. They called their operation Project Nemesis. "We have a problem," Saul said one morning, pacing the small room while eating a bagel. "I found Lucas Sterling, or at least I found where he was. The underground tunnels are a maze. Police did a sweep yesterday. If he's alive, he's deep underground. We need time to find him." "We don't have time," Elena said, looking at the calendar. "The preliminary custody hearing is in 2 days. Julian is going to ask for full legal and physical custody of Leo. If he gets it, he'll send Leo to a boarding school in Switzerland. I'll never see him again." "Then we need to stall," Saul said. "We need to walk into that courtroom and play the role Julian wrote for you." "What do you mean?" "Sun Tzu," Saul grinned, crumbs falling on his tie. "Appear weak when you are strong, and strong when you are weak. If we go in there fighting like tigers, Julian will know we have something up our sleeves. He'll accelerate his attacks. He might even find Lucas before we do. But if you go in there looking like the broken, medicated mess he claims you are, he'll get arrogant. He'll lower his guard." "You want me to lose?" Elena asked, horrified. "I want you to lose the battle so we can win the war," Saul said seriously. Let him have the temporary win. Let him think you're finished. In the meantime, I've hired a private investigator, an ex-Navy SEAL named Donovan, to go into the tunnels and extract Lucas." Elena looked at a photo of Leo she had taped to the wall. He was smiling, holding a toy dinosaur. Her heart ached so badly she felt physically sick. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll play the part." That afternoon, Elena received a courier package. It was from Julian. Inside was a velvet box containing a diamond necklace, a choker, tight and suffocatingly heavy. There was a note on heavy cream cardstock. "For the hearing, try to look presentable. Don't embarrass Leo. J." It was a power move. He was treating her like a pet he still owned. Elena stared at the diamonds. They were worth easily $50,000. "Saul," Elena said, her voice hard, "take this necklace, pawn it, use the money to fund the investigator, and pay for Lucas's rehab when we find him." Saul looked at her with new respect. "That's illegal, technically. It's marital property." "Sue me," Elena said. "I'm the crazy wife, remember? Crazy people do impulsive things." The family court of New York is a place where dreams go to die under the fluorescent buzz of bureaucracy. Courtroom 302 was packed. Julian had leaked the hearing time to the press. Reporters lined the back benches. Julian sat at the plaintiff's table, looking immaculate in a navy Tom Ford suit. He was flanked by Marcus Vane, a lawyer known as the Viper, who charged $1,500 an hour and had never lost a high-profile divorce case. Elena sat on the other side, wearing a simple grey cardigan and no makeup. She looked pale. Saul sat beside her, his suit rumpled, looking like he had just rolled out of bed. "All rise," the bailiff shouted. Judge Lawrence Harmon swept in. Elena's stomach dropped. It was him, the golf buddy. He didn't even look at Elena. He smiled comfortably at Julian. "We are here to determine temporary custody of the minor, Leo Thorne," Judge Harmon announced. "Mr. Vane, you may proceed." Marcus Vane stood up, smoothing his silk tie. He didn't walk to the podium. He paced in front of Eleanor, invading her space. "Your Honor," Vane began, his voice dripping with faux concern. "This case is tragic. We have a father, Mr. Thorne, who is a pillar of the community, a captain of industry. And we have a mother, who is quite frankly a danger to herself and others." Vane pulled out a remote. "I would like to submit Exhibit A, security footage from the Pierre Hotel Gala." A screen descended. The video played. It showed the moment Elena had grabbed Julian's arm in the lobby, but the video had been doctored. It was zoomed in. The frame rate slowed down to make Elena's movements look jerky and aggressive. It looked like she was attacking him. "Look at the rage," Vane narrated. "Look at the instability. Mrs. Thorne has refused psychiatric evaluation. She is currently living in the back of a disbarred lawyer's office in Hell's Kitchen. She has no income, no home, and, we have reason to believe, a substance abuse problem." Vane slammed a pill bottle onto the table. "Oxycodone, prescribed to Mrs. Thorne 3 years ago for a back injury. We found this in her bedside drawer." "That bottle is 3 years old and full," Saul objected, standing up. "She never took them." "Sit down, Mr. Berkowitz," Judge Harmon snapped. "Overruled." Julian sat stoically, looking at his hands with a practiced expression of sorrow. He looked up at Elena, and for a split second, a smirk ghosted across his lips. "I own this room," his eyes said. "Your Honor," Vane concluded, "we ask for full sole custody. No visitation until Mrs. Thorne completes a 90-day inpatient program at a facility of our choosing." Judge Harmon turned to Saul. "Counsel, do you have a defense?" Saul stood up slowly. He looked defeated. "Your Honor, my client is going through a difficult transition. We ask for 50-50 custody." "Based on what?" Judge Harmon scoffed. She's homeless, Mr. Berkowitz. Denied. The gavel banged. It sounded like a gunshot. Temporary sole custody is granted to Mr. Julian Thorne. The mother is granted supervised visitation once a month for 2 hours at the discretion of the father. Next hearing is set for 3 weeks from today. Dismissed. The courtroom erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Mrs. Thorne, are you on drugs? Julian, how do you feel? Julian stood up and buttoned his jacket. He walked over to Elena. I told you, he whispered, loud enough only for her to hear. You are nothing. Now get out of my sight before I have you arrested for trespassing. Elena looked up at him. Tears streamed down her face. Real tears, because losing Leo was a knife in her heart. But beneath the tears her eyes were clear. Enjoy your victory, Julian, she whispered back. What? I said, enjoy it. It's the last one you'll ever have. Julian laughed and walked away, high-fiving his lawyer. As Eleanor and Saul pushed through the crowd to the elevator, Saul's phone buzzed. He checked it, and his eyes widened. He grabbed Elena's arm as the elevator doors closed, shutting out the cameras. We got him, Saul breathed. Lucas? Elena asked, hope surging in her chest. Yes. Donovan found him. He's in bad shape, Elena. Malnourished, withdrawal. He's a wreck. He's currently in a safe house in Jersey. Can he testify in 3 weeks? He can barely speak, Saul said grimly. But we have something else. When Julian filed his financial affidavit just now, to prove he can support Leo, he got lazy. Saul held up a copy of the paperwork Julian's team had just filed. Because he thinks you're stupid, and because he thinks he owns the judge, he didn't scrub the metadata on his asset list. He listed a holding company called Blue Sky Ventures as the owner of his Hamptons estate. So? So, Saul grinned, his gold tooth flashing. Blue Sky Ventures is the parent company listed on the Ethelgard drive. He just admitted, in a court of law, that he owns the shell company used for the fraud. He linked himself to the crime. Elena wiped her tears. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, burning fury. He thinks I'm broken, Elena said. Now let's show him what happens when you step on glass. The safe house in New Jersey was a rundown cabin near the Pine Barrens, smelling of damp wood and mildew. Inside, the heating rattled, fighting a losing battle against the biting winter cold. On the sofa lay Lucas Sterling. The man who once drove million-dollar cars and wore bespoke suits was now a shivering skeleton. His skin was grey, covered in sores, and his eyes were wild with the tremors of withdrawal. He's not going to make it, Donovan, the ex-SEAL investigator said, standing by the window with a shotgun. His heart rate is erratic. He needs a hospital. No hospital, Elena said firmly, wringing out a wet cloth. If we check him in anywhere, Julian's digital alerts will trigger. He'll be dead in an hour. Elena knelt beside the sofa. She had been awake for 30 hours straight. She wiped the sweat from Lucas's forehead. Lucas, she whispered. Lucas, look at me. Lucas groaned, his teeth chattering. They'll kill me. The architect. He sees everything. The architect is just a man, Elena said, her voice fierce. And Julian is just a man. But they took my son, Lucas, and they ruined your life. I need you to fight. For 3 days it was a hellscape. Elena didn't sleep. She spoon-fed Lucas broth, held him while he screamed from the pain of detox, and cleaned him up when he was too weak to move. She wasn't the billionaire's wife anymore. She was a warrior tending to the wounded. On the 4th morning, the screaming stopped. Lucas fell into a deep, natural sleep. When he woke up, the madness was gone from his eyes. Mrs. Thorne? He rasped, sitting up slowly. Call me Elena. Why are you doing this? Lucas asked, looking at his trembling hands. I helped him. I drove him to his mistress's. I carried the bags of cash. I'm a bad person." "We've all been bad people to survive bad situations," Elena said, handing him a cup of coffee. "But on Tuesday, we have a chance to be good. I have the drive from the Ethelgard project. I have the key from Arthur Penhaligon. All I need is the voice." Lucas closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. "He has a stash," Lucas said suddenly. "What?" "Julian. He keeps a physical backup of the bribes, in case the servers go down. It's not in the bank. It's not in the office." "Where is it?" "It's in the crypt," Lucas said, "his family mausoleum at Greenwood Cemetery, inside his mother's urn. He thinks it's the one place no one would dare look." Elena looked at Saul, who was dozing in the corner. Saul woke up with a start. "That's enough for a federal warrant," Saul said, rubbing his eyes. "But we can't get a warrant without probable cause, and we can't get probable cause until Lucas testifies." "Then let's get him a suit," Elena said, standing up. "He has a show to put on." Back in Manhattan, Julian Thorne was feeling invincible. He sat in his corner office, overlooking Central Park. His lawyer, Marcus Vane, poured 2 glasses of scotch. "The judge is locked in," Vane said. "Harmon is going to rule for permanent sole custody on Tuesday. He'll declare Elena mentally incompetent. You'll have power of attorney over her assets, too." "Good." Julian swirled the amber liquid. "Have you heard from her?" "Not a peep. Berkowitz's office is closed. They're probably hiding, trying to scrape together a settlement offer. They know they've lost." Julian walked to the window. "She thought she could leave me," he murmured. "She thought she was a person. I had to remind her she was just an accessory." He didn't notice the drone hovering a mile away, its long-range lens capturing the celebration. And he certainly didn't know that inside the closed office of Saul Berkowitz, a tailor was currently measuring Lucas Sterling for the most important suit of his life. Tuesday morning arrived with a thunderstorm that turned the New York sky a bruised purple. The courtroom was even more crowded than before. This was the finale. The press sensed blood. The headline on the morning papers read, "Thorne versus Thorne, the final verdict." Julian arrived with an entourage of 6 lawyers. He looked relaxed, almost bored. He checked his watch, texting his pilot to ready the jet for a celebratory trip to Aspen. Elena arrived 10 minutes late. She walked in alone. No Saul. The murmurs started instantly. Where is her lawyer? Did he quit? Eleanor walked to the defendant's table and sat down. She wore a white suit, sharp, tailored, immaculate. It was a stark contrast to the grey cardigan from the last hearing. She placed a single file on the table. "Mrs. Thorne," Judge Harmon said, looking over his glasses with disdain, "where is your counsel?" "Mr. Berkowitz is running a slight errand, Your Honor," Elena said clearly. Her voice didn't shake. "He will be joining us shortly. I am prepared to begin without him." "Very well," Harmon sighed. "Mr. Vane, make your closing argument so we can wrap this up." Marcus Vane stood up. "Your Honor, this is a waste of the court's time. The defendant is erratic, late, and unrepresented. We ask for immediate judgment." "I have a witness," Elena interrupted. The courtroom went silent. Julian frowned. "A witness? Who?" "Her hairdresser." "Mrs. Thorne," the judge said, annoyed. "You submitted your witness list weeks ago. It was empty." "This is a rebuttal witness, Your Honor," Elena said, reciting the law Saul had made her memorize. "Allowed under Article 4 of the Family Court Act when new evidence regarding the child's safety comes to light." "Safety?" Julian spoke up, breaking protocol. "I am the safest parent here." "Call your witness," Judge Harmon said, rolling his eyes. "Make it quick." Elena stood up. She turned to the heavy oak doors at the back of the room. She didn't look at the judge. She looked straight at Julian. The defense calls Lucas Sterling. The color drained from Julian's face so fast it looked like he had been shot. He gripped the table, his knuckles turning white. Marcus Vane dropped his pen. The doors opened. Saul Berkowitz walked in first, grinning like a Cheshire cat. Behind him walked Lucas. He looked healthy. He was clean-shaven, wearing a navy suit that fit perfectly. He walked with a steady, confident stride. He walked past Julian, locking eyes with his former boss. Julian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Lucas took the stand. He placed his hand on the Bible. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do," Lucas said. His voice was strong. "Mr. Sterling," Saul said, stepping forward, "please state your previous relationship to the plaintiff, Julian Thorne." "I was his personal driver and fixer for 6 years, Lucas said. "Objection!" Vane screamed, jumping up. "This man is a known drug addict. He is unreliable. This is an ambush." "Overruled," Judge Harmon said, though he looked nervous. "I want to hear this. Continue." "Mr. Sterling," Saul continued, "did you ever witness Mr. Thorne engage in illegal activities that would endanger his child?" "Every day," Lucas said calmly. "I witnessed him threaten federal judges. I witnessed him launder money through a shell company called Ethelgard, and I witnessed him physically strike his wife, Elena, on 3 separate occasions." "Liar!" Julian shouted, standing up. "He's a junkie. I fired him for stealing." "Sit down, Mr. Thorne," the bailiff warned. "I have proof," Lucas said. "I have the ledger." Saul walked to the table and picked up the Ethelgard drive. He plugged it into the court's projector system. "Your Honor," Saul said, "this drive is encrypted, but Mr. Sterling has the key." Lucas recited a string of numbers from memory, the numbers from Arthur's locket. Saul typed them in. The screen on the wall turned green. "Access granted." Thousands of files began to scroll. Bank transfers, bribes, names, dates, and at the very top, a transfer of $500,000 to an offshore account named Harmon Retirement Fund. The courtroom gasped. Judge Harmon froze. He stared at the screen, seeing his own name in the ledger of a criminal enterprise. "It seems," Saul said, his voice ringing out like a bell, "that the plaintiff has not only been laundering money, but he has also been bribing the very judge presiding over this case." The silence in courtroom 302 was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a held breath before a scream. On the projection screen, the green text glowed with damning clarity against the dim lights of the room. It wasn't just a spreadsheet. It was a smoking gun. The rows scrolled automatically, line after line of wire transfers, offshore shell accounts, and illegal kickbacks, but the scrolling stopped abruptly on a single entry, highlighted in red by the software Arthur Penhaligon had designed. Date: October 12th, 2024. Amount $500,000. Sender: Ethelgard Logistics, Vanguardia subsidiary. Beneficiary: Harmon Blind Trust, Cayman Islands. Memo: consulting fees custody arrangement. The gasp that ripped through the courtroom started in the press gallery and swept forward like a wave. Every reporter was on their feet. The flashbulbs began to pop, creating a strobe light effect of chaos. Judge Lawrence Harmon sat frozen on his bench. The blood had drained from his face, leaving him a waxen shade of grey. He stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. He reached for his gavel, his hand trembling so violently that he knocked his water pitcher over. The glass shattered, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Turn it off!" Harmon screeched, his voice cracking. "Bailiff, seize that equipment! This is hacked material! This is a felony!" But the bailiff didn't move. He was staring at the screen, looking back at the judge with a mixture of horror and disgust. Julian Thorne stood up slowly. For the first time in his life, the master of the universe looked small. He adjusted his suit jacket, a nervous tick, his eyes darting from the screen to the doors, calculating an exit. "It's a fabrication," Julian announced, his voice booming, trying to regain control of the room. He pointed an accusatory finger at Eleanor. "This is a deep fake. My wife is mentally unstable. She hired a criminal to forge these documents. I demand a recess." Lucas Sterling, still sitting in the witness box, leaned into the microphone. His voice was calm, cutting through Julian's panic like a razor. "It's not a forge, Julian," Lucas said. "It's the backup, the one you told me to hide in your mother's urn, because you said, and I quote, 'If I go down, I'm taking everyone with me.'" "You junkie filth!" Julian roared, losing his composure completely. He lunged toward the witness stand, his face twisted into a mask of pure rage. "I made you. I own you." Marcus Vane, his high-priced lawyer, grabbed Julian by the waist, wrestling him back. "Julian, stop! You're making it worse!" "I don't care," Julian screamed, shoving his own lawyer into the table. "She did this. She's nothing. She's a broken doll." Elena stood up. In the midst of the screaming men, the flashing cameras and the shattering glass, she was an island of calm. She walked slowly around the defense table until she stood directly in front of Julian, separated only by the low wooden railing. She looked him in the eye, the man who had gaslit her, isolated her, and tried to steal her child. "I am not a broken doll, Julian," she said, her voice low but carrying perfectly in the sudden hush. "I am the one thing you never calculated for." "And what is that?" Julian spat, sweat beading on his forehead. "I am a mother," Elena said, "and you just threatened her cub." Before Julian could respond, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open. They exploded inward. "FBI! Federal agents! Nobody move!" The shout was deafening. A dozen agents in tactical body armor swarmed the room, their weapons drawn but lowered. The precision was terrifying. They moved like a single organism, securing the exits, the jury box, and the bench. "Special Agent Miller, Financial Crimes Division," the lead agent barked, flashing a badge. He marched down the center aisle, flanked by 2 officers. He didn't stop at the defense table. He walked straight to the judge's bench. 2 agents moved up the stairs behind Judge Harmon. They grabbed him by the arms, hauling him out of his high leather chair. The symbol of his authority, his black robe, twisted around him as he kicked and screamed. "You can't do this! I have judicial immunity!" Harmon wailed as they zip-tied his hands behind his back. "Not for RICO charges, you don't," Agent Miller said coldly. "Judge Lawrence Harmon, you are under arrest for racketeering, wire fraud, and accepting bribes." As they dragged the disgraced judge out the side door, the rest of the team circled Julian. Julian backed away, hitting the edge of the table. He looked around for an ally, but everyone, his lawyers, his security, even his assistant Lydia, had stepped back, distancing themselves from the blast radius. "Julian Thorne," Agent Miller said, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest." "Do you know who I am?" Julian hissed, baring his teeth. "I am the CEO of Vanguardia. I have the president on speed dial. If you touch me, I will have your badge. I will have your pension. I will burn your life to the ground." Agent Miller didn't blink. He spun Julian around, slamming him chest first onto the table, right on top of the custody papers he had expected to win. "You have the right to remain silent," Miller recited, ratcheting the cuffs tight, tighter than necessary. "I suggest you use it." As they hauled Julian upright, he looked wild. His hair was disheveled, his tie crooked. He looked frantically at the gallery, at the press, and finally his eyes locked on Eleanor. The arrogance crumbled. Desperation took its place. The reality of a federal prison cell. No chefs, no jets, no power, crashed down on him. "Eleanor!" he screamed, his voice breaking into a sob. "Eleanor, wait! Tell them it's a mistake. We can work this out. I'll give you half. I'll give you everything. Just tell them." Eleanor watched him. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just looked at him with a profound, terrifying indifference. It was the look you give a stranger. "You have nothing left to give me, Julian," she said softly. The agents dragged him out. His screams of, "Elena! Elena!" echoed down the marble hallway, long after the doors swung shut. The courtroom descended into absolute pandemonium. Reporters were shouting questions, climbing over seats to get to Elena. Saul Berkowitz stood up, buttoned his rumpled jacket, and held up his hands. "No comment," Saul shouted joyfully. "My client has a previous engagement." Elena turned to Lucas Sterling, who was stepping down from the witness box. He looked exhausted, but lighter, as if a heavy stone had been lifted from his chest. "Thank you," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "You saved us." "No," Lucas smiled, his eyes wet. "You saved me." Elena didn't stay for the circus. She turned and walked out the back doors, flanked by Saul. She walked through the chaos of the hallway, ignoring the flashing cameras, ignoring the questions about the billions of dollars involved. She had only one destination. The Child Protective Services waiting room was a quiet, sterile box with flickering fluorescent lights and a pile of old magazines. In the corner, sitting on a plastic chair, was a small boy with messy hair, clutching a plastic dinosaur like a lifeline. He looked small, scared. Elena stopped in the doorway, her breath caught in her throat. The adrenaline that had sustained her for weeks suddenly evaporated, leaving her shaking. "Leo?" she choked out. The boy's head snapped up. His eyes widened. He dropped the dinosaur. "Mommy!" He scrambled off the chair, his little sneakers squeaking on the linoleum, and ran. He ran as fast as his legs could carry him. Elena dropped to her knees on the hard floor, not caring about her white suit. She opened her arms, and Leo collided with her, burying his face in her neck. She wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his hair. He smelled like baby shampoo and graham crackers. He felt solid. He was real. He was hers. "I missed you," Leo sobbed into her shoulder. "Daddy said you went away." "I know, baby," Elena cried, rocking him back and forth, tears streaming down her face and soaking his shirt. "I know, but I'm back. I'm right here, and nobody is ever taking you away again. I promise. I promise." Saul stood in the doorway, watching them. He took a bite of a stale bagel he pulled from his pocket, wiping a tear from his eye. "Not bad for a helpless woman," he muttered to himself. Not bad at all. The Manhattan skyline gleamed under the summer sun. Elena walked into the boardroom of the newly christened Phoenix Foundation. The glass walls overlooked the city she used to fear. She wore a tailored crimson dress, a color of power, of life. The table was full, not with greedy shareholders or corrupt sycophants, but with advocates, forensic accountants, and legal sharks. "The audit on the Harmon cases is complete," Saul Berkowitz said from the end of the table. He was now the chief legal officer, though he still wore suspenders. "We've overturned 42 unfair custody rulings presided over by that crook. 42 mothers are getting their kids back this week because of us." "And Julian?" Elena asked, looking at the file in front of her. "The plea deal was rejected," Lucas Sterling said. He stood by the door as head of security, looking sharp and professional. "He's going to trial next month. With Arthur Penhaligon testifying against him, he's looking at 25 years minimum. He's currently sharing a cell with a car thief in metropolitan detention. I hear he's not enjoying the menu. Elena smiled. A genuine, easy smile. Good, she said. Let's get to work. She walked out of the office at 5 p.m. sharp, something Julian would never have done. A black car was waiting downstairs. Lucas opened the door for her. "Home, Mrs. Thorne?" Lucas asked. "Not Thorne," Elena corrected him gently. "Use my maiden name. It's Ms. Rossi." "Home, Ms. Rossi?" "No," Elena said, checking her watch. "The park. Leo has a soccer game, and I'm bringing the orange slices." As the car pulled away into the traffic, merging with the life of the city, Elena looked out the window. She wasn't just a survivor of the storm. She was the storm that had cleared the air. And for the first time in a decade, the view was beautiful. And that, my friends, is how Eleanor Rossi turned the tables on the man who thought he owned the world. Julian Thorne made the classic mistake of a narcissist. He assumed that kindness was weakness, and that silence was submission. He built a fortress of lies, but he didn't realize that Elena was quietly removing the foundation, brick by brick. This story reminds us that the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one shouting threats. It's the one who is observing, planning, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Elena didn't just win a court case. She dismantled a corrupt empire and saved dozens of other families in the process. I really hope you enjoyed this longer, deep dive into the story of Eleanor and Julian. If this story gave you chills, please hit that like button. It helps the algorithm share this justice with more people. And I have a question for you. Do you think Julian deserved a longer sentence, or was losing his empire the ultimate punishment? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story of betrayal and revenge. Until next time.